The moment Daniel Carter abandoned that executive interview, running past security like a man possessed, he thought his life was over. He was wrong. It was just beginning. What happens when a desperate father chooses his dying daughter over his last chance at survival? When walking out of that glass tower means losing everything, the job, the apartment, the final thread holding his world together? This is the story of one impossible choice that changed two lives forever. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of the 42nd floor buzzed with the kind of sterile confidence that only money could buy. Daniel Carter sat across from three executives in suits that probably cost more than his rent, past due rent, if he was being honest with himself, and tried to remember how to breathe like a man who belonged in rooms like this. "Walk us through your approach to crisis management, Mr. Carter," the woman in the center said. She was younger than him, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and sharper questions. Her nameplate read, Victoria Hale, Chief Executive Officer. Daniel opened his mouth to answer, drawing on the presentation he'd rehearsed in the bathroom mirror that morning while Emma ate cereal at their cramped kitchen table. But before he could speak, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. You don't check your phone in interviews. That was rule number 1, especially when you were on interview number 18 in 4 months, especially when the power company had given you a final notice, especially when your 8-year-old daughter's school shoes had holes in them that you'd covered with duct tape on the inside so she wouldn't know. "I believe crisis management starts with," Daniel began. The phone vibrated again. And again. Victoria Hale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Disapproval, maybe. Or worse, pity for a candidate so desperate he couldn't even silence his phone properly. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his face burning. "I thought I'd turned it off. If you'll give me just one." The phone rang. Not a vibration this time, a full, piercing ring that shattered the corporate silence like glass. The two executives flanking Victoria exchanged glances. Daniel fumbled for the phone, intending to silence it, to salvage whatever microscopic chance he had left. Then he saw the caller ID, Riverside Elementary School. His blood turned to ice water. Emma's school never called unless something was wrong, and they'd never, ever called twice. His fingers were trembling as he looked up at the three faces across the table, trying to form an apology, an explanation, anything. The phone rang again. "I have to..." Daniel's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I have to take this." He didn't wait for permission. His hands were shaking so badly, he almost dropped the phone as he pressed it to his ear and turned away from the table. "Mr. Carter?" The voice on the other end was tight, professional in the way people get when they're trying not to panic. "This is Principal Morrison at Riverside Elementary. There's been an accident. Emma fell from the playground equipment and..." The rest of the words came through a tunnel. "Unresponsive, ambulance, St. Catherine's Hospital. You need to come immediately." Daniel's vision narrowed. The glass walls of the conference room seemed to tilt, and for one terrible second, he thought he might actually fall. His daughter. His Emma. Unresponsive. "Mr. Carter?" Victoria Hale's voice cut through the fog. "Is everything..." But Daniel was already moving. He shoved the phone into his pocket, grabbed his worn briefcase from beside his chair, and ran. Not walked quickly. Not excused himself with dignity. Ran. Like a father who just heard his whole world might be ending. "Mr. Carter!" One of the other executives called after him. "We're not finished." Daniel hit the hallway at a sprint, his cheap dress shoes slapping against marble floors that probably cost more per square foot than his monthly income. His briefcase banged against his leg as he ran. Behind him, he heard the conference room door open, heard footsteps, heard someone calling his name, but he didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't care. The elevator was closing. "Wait!" Daniel shouted, his voice raw. "Hold the elevator!" But the doors slid shut, smooth and indifferent as executioners. He slammed the call button with his palm, once, twice, 3 times, as if violence could make technology care about his emergency. The numbers above the other elevator crawled downward with agonizing slowness. 45, 4, 43. "Mr. Carter." He spun around. Victoria Hale stood 10 feet away, her heels in her hand. She must have run after him. Her perfectly composed executive mask cracked just enough to show something human underneath. "I'm sorry," Daniel gasped, and he was. Sorry for running out, sorry for ruining his last chance, sorry for being the kind of desperate that showed on your face like a wound. "My daughter, there was an accident. I have to go," Victoria said simply. The elevator dinged, the doors opened. Daniel stumbled inside, punching the lobby button so hard his finger went numb. As the doors began to close, he saw Victoria Hale still standing there in the hallway, barefoot, watching him with an expression he couldn't read and didn't have time to decipher. Then the doors shut, and he was alone with his reflection in polished steel, a 34-year-old man in a department store suit, with eyes that had learned too much about fear and not enough about hope. The elevator descended, and Daniel made himself breathe. In, out, in, out. Emma was fine. She had to be fine. Kids fell all the time. They were resilient. She'd fallen off her bike last summer and gotten right back up. This was probably nothing. A precaution. Schools were careful these days, overly careful even, but they'd said unresponsive. The elevator felt like it was moving through concrete. Daniel watched the numbers descend, 40, 39, 38, each floor a separate eternity. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and tried to call the hospital. The line rang 4 times before dumping him into an automated menu. For emergencies, please hang up and dial 911. For patient information, please press 1. For billing, Daniel stabbed the button for patient information and got another menu, then another. By the time he reached someone human, the elevator had hit the lobby and he was running again, phone pressed to his ear. "St. Catherine's Hospital. How may I direct your call?" "My daughter, Emma Carter, she was just brought in by ambulance. I need to know." "Are you family, sir?" "I'm her father." The words came out sharp, desperate. "Is she okay? Is she—" "I'll transfer you to the emergency department." "Wait." But she was already gone, replaced by hold music. Daniel burst through the glass doors of the office building into afternoon sunlight that seemed obscenely bright. He ran for the street, trying to flag down a taxi while the hold music chirped cheerfully in his ear. A yellow cab sailed past without slowing, then another. Daniel ran into the street, waving his arm, his briefcase, anything to make them stop. A horn blared. Brakes squealed. A driver leaned out his window and cursed at Daniel in 3 languages. "Emergency department, this is Nurse Chen. My daughter, Emma Carter, 8 years old, playground accident. 1 moment, please." "No, don't put me on hold." Click. More music. Daniel wanted to scream. Instead, he ran. St. Catherine's was 15 blocks north. No buses ran direct. No cabs would stop. And he'd sold his car 3 months ago to pay rent that he'd still ended up short on. So he ran. His briefcase slammed against his hip with every stride. His tie whipped over his shoulder. His dress shoes weren't made for running. They were made for sitting in waiting rooms and interviews, for the kind of walking that didn't leave scuff marks on expensive floors. By the 3rd block, he could feel blisters forming. By the 5th, his lungs were burning. "Emergency department, this is Emma Carter," Daniel gasped into the phone. 8 years old, brought in from Riverside Elementary. I'm her father. Please just tell me if she's— "Sir, I need you to speak more slowly." Daniel stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, people flowing around him like water around a stone. He forced himself to breathe, to speak like a rational human being instead of a father trying not to shatter. "My daughter, Emma Carter, age 8. She was brought to your emergency room from Riverside Elementary School about 20 minutes ago. Playground accident. I'm on my way, but I need to know if she's—" His voice broke. "Please. I need to know if she's okay." The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. "Mr. Carter, your daughter is currently being evaluated by our trauma team. She's conscious and stable." The world stopped spinning. "She's conscious?" "Yes, sir. She was unconscious when she arrived, but she woke up in the ambulance. The doctor will need to run some tests, but she's asking for you." Daniel's knees almost gave out. He grabbed a parking meter for support and tried to remember how to breathe properly. "I'm coming. Tell her I'm coming. He looked up at the street signs, trying to orient himself through the fog of relief and residual terror. I'm about 10 blocks away. Tell her Daddy's coming. We will, Mr. Carter. Come to the main emergency entrance. The line went dead. Daniel shoved the phone in his pocket and ran faster than before. His briefcase banged against a fire hydrant, and he almost dropped it, almost left it there on the sidewalk. But it had his wallet, his phone charger, the folder with his resume. Everything he owned that mattered, except for Emma. The irony hit him as he ran. He'd just abandoned the job interview that was supposed to solve all his problems. The interview that was supposed to mean insurance and paychecks and security. And for what? To sprint through the city toward a hospital bill he had absolutely no way to pay. But Emma was conscious. She was asking for him. Everything else could burn. Daniel's side was cramping by block 8. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. He wasn't in shape for this. 3 years of single parenthood had been 3 years of boxed mac and cheese and skipped meals so Emma could have seconds. 3 years of stress and no sleep and the kind of exhaustion that lived in your bones. A stitch opened up in his side like a knife wound. He ignored it, pushed harder. Halfway through block 9, his phone rang again. Unknown number. Daniel almost didn't answer, but the terror was still too fresh. He swiped without slowing down. Mr. Carter? A man's voice, professional and cool. This is James Bradford from Hale Industries. We've reviewed your departure from the interview this afternoon. Daniel's heart sank. Of course, the rejection call. They couldn't even wait until he got to the hospital. I understand, Daniel said, still running. I'm sorry I walked out. It was an emergency. Yes, well, Bradford's voice had the tone of someone trying to remain professional while discussing something distasteful. While we sympathize with your situation, you must understand that we're looking for candidates who can demonstrate commitment and professionalism even under stress. Walking out of an interview, my daughter was dying. The words came out flat, hard, leaving no room for corporate doublespeak. A pause. We were given to understand she was injured, not... They told me she was unresponsive. They told me to come immediately, so I came immediately. Daniel's voice was rising now. 4 months of rejections and eviction notices, and desperate grinding poverty finding their target. You want to talk to me about commitment? I've been committed to keeping my kid alive and fed and safe for 3 years while your company and every other company in this city looked at my resume and saw someone who took time off to raise his daughter as someone who didn't have what it takes. You want professionalism? I'm a single father who showed up to your interview after taking 3 buses because I sold my car for rent money. I ironed this suit with an iron I borrowed from my neighbor because mine broke and I couldn't afford to replace it. So you'll forgive me if I don't particularly care about your standards for commitment when my 8-year-old daughter is in the hospital. He hung up. His hands were shaking. He'd just destroyed his last bridge, burned his last chance, and he didn't care. Couldn't care. Emma mattered. The rest was just noise. St. Catherine's Hospital rose up ahead, a massive concrete and glass structure that looked like it ate money for breakfast. Daniel put on one final burst of speed, his legs screaming, his lungs raw, his cheap dress shoes leaving pieces of themselves on the pavement. The emergency entrance slid open automatically. Daniel stumbled through into air conditioning that felt like ice water on his sweat-soaked skin. The reception desk stood 20 feet away, a fortress of laminated countertops and efficient-looking women with lanyards. Emma Carter, Daniel gasped. I'm her father. They called me. Where is she? The receptionist, young, tired, kind eyes behind practical glasses, typed something into her computer. Room 7. Through those doors, turn left, 3rd room on the right. But, sir, you'll need to... Daniel was already moving. He heard her calling after him about paperwork, about insurance information, about checking in, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not until he saw Emma with his own eyes. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and fear. Room 1, someone crying. Room 3, machines beeping steady rhythms. Room 5, a doctor speaking in low, serious tones. Room 7. Daniel stopped in the doorway and felt his heart restart. Emma was sitting up in the hospital bed, small and pale against white sheets. Her blonde hair was matted on one side, and there was a bandage above her left eyebrow, But her eyes, those bright blue eyes she'd gotten from her mother, were open and clear and found him immediately. "Daddy!" Her voice was small, scratchy, the most beautiful sound Daniel had ever heard. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, careful of the IV line in her hand, careful of the monitors attached to her chest, careful of everything except making sure she was real and solid and here. "I'm here, baby," he whispered into her hair. "I'm here. You're okay. You're okay." Emma was crying, not the theatrical tears of a scraped knee, but deep shuddering sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel held her tighter, feeling his own tears finally break free. All the terror of the last 45 minutes, all the months and years of barely holding it together, all the weight of trying to be enough for her when he never felt like enough. It all came pouring out while he held his daughter and thanked God or the universe or whatever was listening that she was alive. "I fell," Emma hiccuped against his shoulder. "I was trying to do the monkey bars like the big kids, and I fell, and I don't remember anything, and then I woke up in the ambulance, and you weren't there, and I was so scared." I know, baby. But I'm here now." Daniel pulled back just enough to look at her face, to catalog every scratch and bruise, to convince himself she was really okay. "Does anything hurt?" "My head and my arm." She held up her left arm, which was wrapped in a soft cast from wrist to elbow. "The doctor said it's broken. He said I have to wear this for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Daniel's mind immediately started calculating. Cost of the cast, follow-up appointments, pain medication, the time he'd need to take off work to help her, except he didn't have work. Not anymore. He'd just hung up on his last prospect. "Mr. Carter?" Daniel turned. A doctor stood in the doorway. Late 40s, graying hair, the kind of calm competence that probably cost extra. His badge read, "Dr. Raymond Pierce, Emergency Medicine. Can I speak with you for a moment, outside?" Daniel looked at Emma, who gripped his hand tighter. "It's okay," he told her, keeping his voice steady even as his stomach dropped. "I'll be right back. I promise." He followed Dr. Pierce into the hallway, where the doctor closed the door with the careful precision of someone about to deliver news nobody wanted to hear. "Your daughter is very lucky, Mr. Carter. She has a mild concussion, a fractured radius in her left arm, and various contusions, but no internal bleeding, no spinal damage, and no serious head trauma. Kids are resilient. She should make a full recovery." Relief hit Daniel so hard he had to lean against the wall. Thank God. "However," Dr. Pierce continued, and there it was, the word that came before every piece of bad news. "We'd like to keep her overnight for observation. With head injuries, especially in children, we need to monitor for any complications, and she'll need follow-up care. An orthopedic appointment in a week to check the cast, probably another in 3 weeks, possibly physical therapy depending on how the bone sets." Daniel nodded slowly, his mind already racing through the impossibility of what came next. "Okay, whatever she needs." Dr. Pierce's expression softened slightly. "I'll have someone from billing come speak with you. They can discuss payment options, insurance coverage." "I don't have insurance." The words came out flat, matter of fact. There was no point in pretending otherwise. The doctor's face remained carefully neutral, but Daniel saw the slight shift, the mental recalculation of how this conversation was going to go. "I see. Well, the hospital has programs for patients experiencing financial hardship. We can work with you on a payment plan." "How much are we talking about?" Dr. Pierce hesitated. "The ER visit, overnight observation, x-rays, the cast, medications. Conservatively, you're looking at $8,000 to $12,000, possibly more depending on whether we need additional imaging." $8,000 to $12,000. Daniel had $417 in his checking account. His rent, the rent he was already 2 months behind on, was $950 a month. He had $17 in his wallet and a maxed-out credit card he'd been avoiding thinking about for 6 weeks. $8,000 to $12,000 might as well have been $8 to $12 million. "Okay," Daniel heard himself say. "Thank you, doctor." Dr. Pierce gave him a look that Daniel recognized, the look every professional had given him for the past 3 years. Pity mixed with discomfort, the expression of someone who wanted to help but knew they couldn't. who saw the train wreck coming and could only watch. "We'll take excellent care of your daughter, Mr. Carter. The nurses will get her settled in a room upstairs shortly." Then the doctor was gone, and Daniel was alone in the hallway with the white noise of the hospital around him and the weight of impossible numbers pressing down on his chest. He pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. Hale Industries, probably, calling to make absolutely sure he understood how thoroughly he'd destroyed his chances. He didn't listen to the voicemails. What he did do was open his banking app and stare at the numbers there, as if looking at them hard enough might make them different. $417.38. Below that, his credit card. $7,891.45 out of $8,000 limit. He had $108.55 to his name before he hit absolute zero. A notification banner appeared at the top of his screen. Rent payment overdue. Final notice before eviction proceedings. Daniel closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall. The cool paint felt good against his skull. For just a moment, just one weak, shameful moment, he let himself imagine walking away. Not from Emma, never from Emma, but from all of it. The bills, the eviction notices, the endless grinding machinery of poverty that turned humans into numbers and then crushed them anyway. But he couldn't walk away. He'd lost that option the day Emma was born, the day he looked at her tiny, perfect face and promised her mother, dying in a hospital bed not that different from Emma's current room, that he would keep their daughter safe, no matter what it cost him. Some promises you kept until they killed you. Daniel pushed off the wall and straightened his spine. First things first. Get through tonight. Make sure Emma was settled, comfortable, safe. Everything else, the money, the eviction, the job he'd just destroyed, could wait until morning. He opened the door to room 7. Emma had found the remote for the TV mounted on the wall and was flipping through channels with her good hand, her face scrunched up in concentration. She looked so small in the hospital bed, swimming in a gown that was meant for someone 3 times her size. "Did you find anything good?" Daniel asked, sitting down in the chair beside her bed. "Just news and cooking shows?" Emma made a face. "I want to watch cartoons, but they don't have them." "Well, that's just unacceptable." Daniel pulled out his phone and opened the streaming app they shared with his neighbor. Another thing he couldn't really afford, but refused to cut because Emma loved it. "How about we fix that?" He pulled up her favorite show and angled his phone so they could both see it. Emma shifted over in the bed, making room for him, and Daniel carefully climbed up beside her, wrapping one arm around her shoulders while she tucked herself against his side. The cartoon played. Emma laughed at the jokes, her small body warm and solid against his. And Daniel held his daughter and tried not to think about how many episodes they could watch before his phone battery died, or how he was going to explain to her that they might not have a home to go back to, or how he was going to pay for any of this. He tried not to think about the interview he'd run from. He tried not to think about Victoria Hale, standing in that hallway in her bare feet, watching him go. He tried not to think about the rejection call he'd answered while running through the city. He tried not to think about anything except the fact that Emma was alive, and here, and safe in his arms. For tonight, that had to be enough. Because tomorrow the bills would come due, and the hospital would want their money, and his landlord would move forward with eviction, and Daniel would have to figure out how to build a life from the wreckage of this day. But tonight, he had his daughter. Tonight, they had cartoons in a hospital bed and each other. Tonight, they were both still standing. And in the mathematics of single parenthood, that counted as a victory. The cartoon's closing credits were rolling when a nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand and a practiced smile on her face. Emma had fallen asleep against Daniel's shoulder halfway through the second episode, her breathing deep and even despite the occasional beep from the heart monitor. "Mr. Carter?" the nurse whispered. "We're going to move Emma up to the pediatric ward now, room 412. You can come with us if you'd like." Daniel nodded, carefully extracting himself from the bed without waking his daughter. The nurse, her badge read Sarah Martinez, RN, moved with the efficient grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, checking Emma's vitals one more time before disconnecting her from the emergency room monitors. "She's a brave little girl," Sarah said softly as she worked. "Most kids her age are still crying at this point." "She's tougher than I am," Daniel said. and meant it. Emma had her mother's strength, that bedrock resilience that he'd watched carry his wife through 2 years of illness before it finally wasn't enough. The same strength that had kept Emma smiling even when their dinner was cereal 3 nights in a row, even when Daniel had to explain why they couldn't afford the field trip or the new backpack or the birthday party at the roller rink. They moved through the hospital in a strange procession, Sarah pushing Emma's bed, Daniel walking alongside with one hand resting protectively on the rail, another nurse trailing behind with the IV stand. The elevator ride to the 4th floor was silent, except for the mechanical hum and Emma's soft breathing. Room 412 was smaller than the ER bay, but cleaner, more personal. Someone had put up cheerful decals on the walls, cartoon animals and rainbows that were probably meant to be comforting, but just reminded Daniel of how many children passed through this space. How many other parents had stood where he was standing, trying to figure out how to pay for their child's survival. Sarah and the other nurse transferred Emma to the new bed with practiced efficiency. Emma stirred but didn't wake, just made a small sound and curled onto her side, favoring her unbroken arm. "There's a fold-out chair there that converts to a bed," Sarah said, pointing to what looked like the most uncomfortable piece of furniture Daniel had ever seen. "Blankets are in the cabinet. Cafeteria's on the 2nd floor if you get hungry. Though I warn you, the food is terrible. Vending machines on every floor." She paused, studying Daniel's face with the kind of assessment that came from years of seeing parents at their worst. "When's the last time you ate something?" Daniel tried to remember. Breakfast had been black coffee and half of Emma's toast. "This morning." Sarah made a disapproving sound. "Can't take care of her if you don't take care of yourself. I'll bring you a sandwich from the nurse's station. Nothing fancy, but it's free and it's food." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm doing it anyway." She was already heading for the door. "I'll be back in 20 minutes to check her vitals. Try to rest, Mr. Carter. It's going to be a long night." Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with his sleeping daughter and the reality of what came next. He pulled out his phone. 11:47 p.m. The day that had started with Emma tying his tie in their cramped apartment had somehow stretched into this, a hospital room, a broken arm, and a financial catastrophe he had no idea how to navigate. 4 new voicemails. Daniel stared at them for a long moment, then deleted them all without listening. Whatever Hale Industries wanted to say to him, he didn't need to hear it. The message was clear enough. He'd failed, again, to be the kind of person corporate America wanted. What he needed was a plan. Daniel opened the Notes app on his phone and started typing, trying to transform panic into something concrete, something manageable. Immediate. Hospital bill, 8 to 12K. Payment plan? Rent, 2 months behind, eviction notice Friday. Electric bill, final notice, disconnection scheduled. Emma's school, field trip money due, can't afford. Food, $47 left in food budget for the month. He stared at the list. The numbers didn't add up. They hadn't added up for months. He'd been juggling, robbing Peter to pay Paul, stretching every dollar until it screamed. And now it had all come crashing down in a single afternoon. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Carter, this is Victoria Hale. I hope your daughter is well. Please return to our offices at 9 a.m. tomorrow to collect the briefcase you left behind. Building security has it at the front desk." Daniel read the message 3 times. Formal, polite. The corporate equivalent of, "We're done here. Please collect your belongings." He'd forgotten about the briefcase entirely. Not that it mattered. It just held copies of a resume that was apparently worthless and a folder of references from jobs he'd held in another lifetime. Before Emma, before his wife's illness, before everything fell apart. Still, it had his good pen in it. The one his wife had given him when he'd landed his first real job back when they were 25, and the world seemed full of possibilities instead of obstacles. He'd like to have that back, at least. Daniel typed a response. "Thank you. I'll be there." Then he added, "I apologize again for leaving the interview. I hope you understand." He hit send before he could second-guess it, then immediately regretted it. What did it matter if she understood? The job was gone. The opportunity was gone. Another door closed in a hallway that seemed to have nothing but closed doors. Sarah returned with the promised sandwich, turkey and cheese on wheat bread that was slightly stale but tasted like a 5-star meal to Daniel's empty stomach. She checked Emma's vitals, made notes on her chart, and reminded Daniel to press the call button if anything changed. "She'll probably sleep through the night," Sarah said. "Kids usually do after the adrenaline crash. You should try to sleep too." But sleep was impossible. Daniel forced down the sandwich, then spent the next 3 hours sitting in the uncomfortable chair, watching Emma breathe and running calculations that never came out right. If he got another job, a big if, he'd need childcare. Emma's after-school program was $250 a month, and that was the cheap option. If he worked full-time, he'd need coverage until 6 p.m., another $150 monthly minimum. Medical bills, even with a payment plan, probably $300 a month for the next 3 years. Rent on a cheaper apartment if they got evicted, first, last, and security deposit. Call it $3,000 he didn't have. Transportation without a car. Bus passes for 2, maybe 80 monthly. The numbers spiraled. Every solution required money he didn't have to solve a problem that cost more money. It was a trap with no exit, a maze where every path led back to the same conclusion. He couldn't do this. Couldn't provide for Emma the way she deserved. Couldn't keep them both fed and housed and safe. Around 3 a.m., Daniel's phone battery died. He'd forgotten to bring a charger. It was still plugged into the wall of the apartment he might not have access to much longer. He sat in the dark, listening to Emma breathe, and the hospital's nighttime symphony of distant beeps and footsteps and muffled conversations. His mind drifted to the morning, to the ritual that had preceded the disaster. Emma had been so excited about his interview. She'd helped him pick out his tie, standing on a kitchen chair to reach his neck, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked. "You look like a boss, Daddy," she'd said, stepping back to admire her work. "I'm trying to work for a boss, baby girl," Daniel had corrected gently. "Well, they'd be lucky to have you," said with absolute certainty, the kind of faith only children had in their parents. Daniel had kissed the top of her head, breathed in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, the cheap stuff from the dollar store that she insisted smelled fancy, and tried to believe her. Now, watching her sleep in a hospital bed with a broken arm and a concussion, he wondered if maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe the universe was trying to tell him something. Maybe he just wasn't cut out for this, any of this. The thought was poison, but it was familiar poison. He'd had it before, in the dark months after his wife died, when Emma was 5 and asking when Mommy was coming home, and Daniel had to keep explaining death to someone who still believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. He'd had it when the medical bills from his wife's illness had forced them out of their house and into the cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where the playground equipment was broken and the locks barely worked. He'd had it, and he'd pushed it down, and he'd kept going because that's what you did when you were someone's whole world. But God, he was tired. Sarah came back at 4 a.m. to check Emma's vitals. "Still awake?" she asked quietly, not sounding surprised. "Can't sleep," Daniel admitted. She nodded, made her notes, then paused at the door. "My husband and I, we went through something similar 5 years ago. Our son fell off a trampoline at a birthday party, broke his femur, the medical bills." She shook her head. "I work in a hospital, and we still almost went bankrupt. But we made it through. One day at a time, one payment at a time. You'll make it through too." "How?" Daniel asked, and hated how desperate he sounded. "How do you make it through when the math doesn't work?" Sarah gave him a sad smile. "You do what you have to do. You ask for help when you need it. You let go of pride, and you accept that surviving isn't pretty." She gestured at Emma. "And you remember what you're fighting for. That helps." Then she left, and Daniel was alone again with his thoughts and the sound of his daughter's breathing. Dawn came slowly, gray light creeping through the hospital window. Emma stirred around 6:30, her eyes fluttering open with the confused disorientation of waking up somewhere unfamiliar. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, scared. "Right here, baby." Daniel was beside her in an instant, taking her good hand in his. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts, and my arm." She looked down at the cast, her expression crumpling. "I really broke it?" "You really did. But it's going to heal up good as new," the doctor promised. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Am I in trouble?" The question broke something in Daniel's chest. "What? No, baby. Why would you be in trouble?" "Because I fell. Because I was trying to do the big kid monkey bars when you told me to be careful on the playground. Tears were starting to slide down her cheeks. And now we're at the hospital, and hospitals cost money, and I know we don't have money because I heard you on the phone with the landlord lady. And Emma, stop. Daniel cupped her face gently, making her look at him. Listen to me. You are not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. Kids fall down. It happens. And you don't worry about the money, okay? That's my job. Your job is to be 8 years old and heal up and not worry about grown-up stuff. But, no buts. I'm the dad. I do the worrying. You do the being a kid. Deal? Emma nodded, but Daniel could see she didn't believe him. She'd heard too many of his phone calls, seen too many bills with red stamps, noticed too many times when he said no to things she wanted because money was tight. You couldn't hide poverty from the person you lived with. Not really. You could try to shield them from it, but kids noticed everything. A different nurse brought breakfast, oatmeal and orange juice for Emma, coffee for Daniel that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the Reagan administration. Emma picked at her food, and Daniel forced down the coffee because he needed the caffeine more than he needed it to taste good. Dr. Pierce made his rounds at 8:15. Emma's vitals were good, her pupils were responding normally, and the concussion symptoms were mild. I'm comfortable releasing her this afternoon, he said, but I want you to watch for any changes. Dizziness, nausea, confusion, uneven pupils, anything like that, you bring her right back. And she has an appointment with orthopedics in 1 week to check the cast. Daniel nodded, taking mental notes he'd have no way to write down until his phone charged. Thank you, doctor. Someone from billing will be up shortly to discuss payment arrangements. Dr. Pierce's tone was apologetic. Hospital policy. I understand. After the doctor left, Daniel checked the clock. 8:47 a.m. He needed to be at Hale Industries by 9 to get his briefcase, which meant leaving Emma alone in the hospital room for at least 45 minutes. Baby, I need to run an errand really quick, he said, hating the way Emma's face fell. You're leaving? Just for a little bit, less than an hour. I have to pick something up from the place where I had my interview yesterday. But Sarah will be here, and you can watch TV, and I'll be back before you know it. Emma's grip on his hand tightened. Promise? I promise. Daniel kissed her forehead. I'm coming back. Always. He found Sarah at the nurse's station and explained the situation. She assured him she'd check on Emma every 15 minutes, gave him her cell number just in case, and told him to take his time. Daniel thanked her, tucked his dead phone into his pocket, and headed for the elevator feeling like the world's worst father. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of beautiful day that felt like an insult when your life was falling apart. Daniel walked the 15 blocks back to the Hale Industries building, retracing yesterday's desperate sprint in reverse. His blisters had blisters now, and his dress shoes were definitely beyond repair, but he barely noticed. The lobby of Hale Industries was all marble and chrome, the kind of space designed to remind visitors that they were somewhere important. Daniel approached the security desk, feeling acutely aware of his wrinkled suit and the fact that he'd slept in a chair and hadn't shaved. I'm here to pick up a briefcase, he told the guard. Daniel Carter. Ms. Hale said it would be at the front desk. The guard checked his computer, then disappeared into a back room. He returned with Daniel's briefcase, slightly scuffed from yesterday's sprint, but intact. Sign here, the guard said, sliding a clipboard across the desk. Daniel signed, took the briefcase, and turned to leave, then stopped. Victoria Hale was standing by the elevator bank, coffee cup in hand, watching him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel's mind raced through possible responses, apologize again, thank her for keeping his briefcase, explain about Emma. But before he could settle on anything, Victoria crossed the lobby toward him. Mr. Carter? Her voice was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. Ms. Hale, thank you for keeping my briefcase. I appreciate it. How is your daughter? The question caught him off guard. Not, we've decided to go another direction, or, this was unprofessional, but genuine concern in her eyes. She's okay. Broken arm, mild concussion. They're releasing her this afternoon. Victoria nodded slowly. I'm glad to hear it. A pause. And then, do you have a moment to talk? Daniel glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:23. He'd told Emma less than an hour. I really should get back to the hospital. This won't take long, please. She gestured toward a seating area near the windows. 5 minutes. Daniel followed her to the leather chairs, his briefcase clutched in his hand like a shield. Victoria sat with the kind of practiced grace that came from years of commanding rooms, but there was something different about her today. Less polished, more human. I owe you an apology, she said. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry? For James Bradford's call yesterday. He reached out without my authorization to inform you that we wouldn't be moving forward with your candidacy. Victoria's expression was carefully controlled, but Daniel could see anger simmering beneath it. He was out of line. That's not how I run my company. Oh. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. It's fine. I understand. I walked out of the interview. Because your daughter was in the hospital. Yes, but nothing. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Mr. Carter, can I tell you a story? Daniel nodded, confused about where this was going. 12 years ago, I was a junior executive at a finance firm, youngest VP in the company's history. I was in the middle of the biggest pitch of my career, 8 months of work, millions of dollars on the line, when I got a call that my son had been in a car accident. She paused, her eyes distant. He was 16, learner's permit. A drunk driver ran a red light. Daniel's chest tightened. I'm sorry. I left that meeting, walked out in the middle of my presentation. My boss told me if I left, I was finished. I left anyway. Victoria's smile was bitter. My son spent 3 weeks in the ICU. He lived, thank God, but I lost my job, lost my reputation. Every door in the industry closed in my face because I'd proven I wasn't committed enough. That's not fair, Daniel said quietly. No, it's not, but it taught me something important. Victoria met his eyes. It taught me that any company that punishes someone for choosing their family over a job is a company run by people who have their priorities backwards. So when I started Hale Industries 5 years later, I promised myself I'd build something different, a place where being a parent wasn't a liability. Daniel didn't know what to say. This was not the conversation he'd expected to have when he'd walked into this building. When you ran out of that interview yesterday, Victoria continued, I didn't see someone who lacked commitment. I saw someone who had his priorities exactly right, someone who understood that no job, no matter how important, matters more than the people we love. Most companies don't see it that way. Most companies are wrong. Victoria pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket and held it out to him. Daniel Carter, I'd like to formally offer you the position of Senior Operations Manager at Hale Industries. Daniel stared at the envelope like it might bite him. I don't understand. It's a job offer, salary, benefits, full medical coverage for you and Emma, starting immediately if you can manage it. Take a few days to settle things with your daughter first, of course. You're offering me the job after I walked out? I'm offering you the job because you walked out, because when it mattered, you chose right. Victoria stood, brushing invisible lint from her skirt. Read the offer. Think about it. I need someone who understands that business is about people, not just profit margins. Someone who can make hard decisions and live with the consequences. You've been making those decisions for 3 years, Mr. Carter. I'd like you to make them for my company. Daniel opened the envelope with shaking hands. The numbers on the page seemed impossible. $75,000 annually, full health, dental, and vision insurance, 4 weeks paid vacation, flexible hours for family emergencies. It was more money than he'd made in his entire life. It was enough to pay the hospital bills, catch up on rent, buy Emma new shoes that didn't have holes. It was enough to stop drowning and start living. I don't know what to say, Daniel whispered. Say yes. Victoria's smile was genuine now. Say you'll start Monday. Say you'll help me build a company that proves you can be successful and humane at the same time. Yes. The word came out strangled, choked with emotion Daniel couldn't contain. Yes. Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned this. Victoria held out her hand. Welcome to Hale Industries, Mr. Carter. Daniel shook her hand, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Daniel walked back to the hospital in a daze. the envelope tucked inside his briefcase like a secret he was afraid to believe in. The numbers kept replaying in his mind. 75,000, full benefits, flexible hours. But alongside them ran a current of disbelief so strong it made his hands shake. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. Good fortune didn't find single fathers with eviction notices and maxed out credit cards. The universe didn't suddenly decide to be kind. And yet the offer letter was real, pressed against the leather of his briefcase with every step he took. By the time he reached St. Catherine's, his shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool morning air. He'd run part of the way, terrified that he'd been gone too long, that Emma had woken up scared and alone, that something had changed while he was accepting a job that felt too good to be true. But when he pushed open the door to room 412, Emma was sitting up in bed with Sarah, playing some kind of card game with a deck the nurse must have provided. His daughter's face lit up the moment she saw him. "Daddy, Sarah taught me go fish, and I won twice." "3 times," Sarah corrected with a warm smile. "She's a card shark, your daughter." The relief that flooded through Daniel was so intense it made him dizzy. He crossed to the bed and kissed Emma's forehead, breathing in the hospital smell of antiseptic and the lingering strawberry scent of her shampoo underneath. "Sorry I took so long, baby." "It's okay. Sarah told me stories about when she was a nurse in the army. Did you know she was in Afghanistan?" Daniel glanced at Sarah, who shrugged modestly. "Long time ago. Different life." "She's a hero," Emma declared with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old who'd decided someone was worth admiring. "She certainly is," Daniel agreed. "And I bet she has other patients to take care of, so we should let her get back to work." Sarah gathered up the cards and stood, but not before squeezing Daniel's shoulder. A brief gesture that somehow conveyed understanding, encouragement, and solidarity all at once. "Doctor should be by in about an hour to do final checks before discharge. Billing will probably find you before then." The word billing sent a spike of anxiety through Daniel's chest, but it was different now. Muted. He had a job offer in his briefcase. He had insurance coming. He had options that hadn't existed an hour ago. After Sarah left, Emma patted the bed beside her. "Come sit, Daddy. Tell me about your errand." Daniel climbed up carefully, mindful of her cast and the IV that was still feeding fluids into her arm. "I went to pick up my briefcase from yesterday's interview." "The one you left when you came to save me?" Emma's voice was small, guilty. "I didn't save you, baby. The doctors did that. I just showed up." Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "And yes, that interview. Did they yell at you for leaving?" The question twisted something in his chest. 8 years old, and already she understood the precarious nature of their existence, the way one mistake could cost them everything. He hated that she had to know these things. "No, they didn't yell. Actually," he paused, trying to find the right words. "Actually, they offered me the job." Emma's head whipped around so fast he worried about her concussion. "Really? Really? But you left in the middle. You told me you probably wouldn't get it because you had to leave." "I know, but it turns out the boss. Her name is Ms. Hale." She understood. "She has a son, and something similar happened to her once. She said that leaving to help you was the right thing to do." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness she applied to everything important. Then, "Is it a good job?" "It's a very good job." Daniel pulled the envelope from his briefcase and showed her the first page pointing to the salary line. "See this number?" Emma squinted at it. 75,000? That's how much money I'll make in a year." Her eyes went wide. "That's so much money." "It is. It means we can pay our bills. It means we can stay in our apartment or maybe even find a better one. It means you can have new shoes without holes and we can buy the good cereal instead of the store brand." "I like the store brand," Emma said loyally, but Daniel could see the hope blooming in her eyes, the careful optimism of a child who'd learned not to expect too much. "And it comes with health insurance," Daniel continued, "which means the hospital bill for your arm won't be as scary as I thought." "How scary was it before?" "Too scary. Impossibly scary. The kind of scary that kept you awake at 3 in the morning doing math that never worked out." "Pretty scary," Daniel admitted. "But it's going to be okay now." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, her good hand finding his. I'm glad, Daddy. You've been worried a lot lately. I can tell. Have I? Daniel tried to keep his voice light. Yeah, you do this thing where you stare at your phone and your face gets all tight, like you're trying to solve a really hard math problem. And sometimes I hear you on the phone late at night when you think I'm asleep, talking to people about bills and stuff. Daniel closed his eyes. He tried so hard to shield her from the worst of it, to keep his stress and fear contained to the hours after she went to bed. But of course she'd noticed. Emma noticed everything. I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean for you to worry. It's okay. That's what families do, right? We worry about each other. She squeezed his hand. But I'm glad you won't have to worry so much anymore. Me too. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching morning game shows on the hospital TV with the sound turned low. Emma dozed off against his shoulder around 10:30, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of sleep. Daniel held her and tried to let himself believe that maybe, finally, things were turning around. The billing coordinator arrived just before 11, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a tablet full of numbers that still made Daniel's stomach clench despite the job offer in his briefcase. Mr. Carter, I'm Jennifer from Patient Financial Services. Do you have a few minutes to discuss your daughter's account? Daniel carefully extracted himself from Emma's sleeping form and followed Jennifer into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind them. I know I don't have insurance currently, Daniel said before she could start her speech, but I just accepted a job that includes full medical coverage. It starts... He pulled out the offer letter to check. It says benefits are effective immediately upon acceptance of the position. Jennifer's eyebrows rose. That's unusual, but excellent. Do you have documentation? Daniel handed her the letter. She scanned it quickly, her expression shifting from professional sympathy to genuine pleasure. Well, this changes things considerably. Hale Industries has excellent coverage with us. Let me make some calls and see what we can work out. It may be that most of this gets covered after all. Really? Can't promise anything until I check with the insurance department, but it's looking much better than it did 5 minutes ago. She handed back the letter. I'll come find you once I know more. In the meantime, try to relax. It looks like things are working out. Daniel wanted to kiss her. Instead, he just thanked her profusely and returned to Emma's room where his daughter was starting to stir. Was that the money lady? Emma asked groggily. It was. And it looks like the new job's insurance might cover most of the hospital bill. Most of it isn't all of it. No, but most is a lot better than none. Daniel sat back down beside her. We're going to be okay, Em. I promise. Emma studied his face with those two old eyes. You really believe that this time, don't you? I really do. She smiled then, a real smile that crinkled her nose and showed the gap where she'd lost a tooth last month. Good, because I believe it too. Dr. Pierce returned around 1 p.m. to perform his final examination. He checked Emma's pupils, tested her reflexes, asked her a series of questions to assess her cognitive function. Emma answered everything correctly, even the tricky ones about what day it was and who the president was. She's looking good, Dr. Pierce announced. No signs of complications from the concussion. The arm will heal fine. Kid's bones are remarkably resilient. I'm comfortable discharging her, but I want you to watch for any changes. The paperwork I'm giving you lists warning signs. If you see any of them, bring her back immediately. I will. Thank you, doctor. And make sure she keeps that follow-up appointment with orthopedics next week. They'll want to check the cast, make sure everything is healing properly. Daniel added it to his mental list of things he could actually afford to do now. We'll be there. The discharge process took another 2 hours. Paperwork and instructions, and a pharmacy run for pain medication that Daniel's new insurance actually covered. Jennifer found him before they left with news that made him want to cry with relief. Between the insurance coverage and a hospital assistance program, his out-of-pocket cost would be just under $2,000, payable over 12 months with no interest. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank your new employer, Jennifer said with a smile. They have very generous coverage. Your daughter is lucky to have a father who fights for her like you do. Daniel didn't feel like he'd fought for anything. He'd just run when she needed him, made impossible choices because they were the only choices available. But he accepted the compliment with as much grace as he could manage and signed the payment plan agreement with hands that only shook a little. By the time they finally left the hospital, the afternoon sun was starting its descent toward evening. Emma walked slowly, still a little unsteady on her feet, her casted arm cradled protectively against her chest. Daniel carried her discharge paperwork and medications, one hand resting on her shoulder to steady her. "Can we get pizza for dinner?" Emma asked as they waited at the bus stop. "Real pizza, not the frozen kind?" Daniel thought about the $47 left in his food budget, thought about the job starting Monday, thought about his daughter who'd spent the last 24 hours in a hospital bed and just wanted something normal and good. "Yeah, baby, we can get pizza." Emma's face lit up like he'd just promised her Disney World. "With breadsticks?" "With breadsticks." The bus ride home took 45 minutes. Emma fell asleep against his shoulder again, exhausted from the ordeal of the past day. Daniel watched the city roll by through smudged windows and tried to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, he'd been a desperate man with no prospects and no hope. Now he had a job. Insurance, a path forward that didn't involve choosing which bills to ignore. Their apartment building looked exactly the same as always. Shabby brick, a front door that didn't quite close right, graffiti on the mailboxes that the landlord never bothered to paint over. But walking into it now felt different. Less like a trap, more like a temporary stop on the way to something better. Mrs. Chen from 3B was in the hallway, struggling with her grocery bags. Daniel held the door for her while juggling Emma and his briefcase. "Thank you, Daniel. How is sweet Emma? I heard sirens yesterday, saw you running." "She broke her arm, but she's going to be fine." Mrs. Chen made sympathetic noises and tried to press a container of soup into his hands. "For Emma, chicken soup. Very good for healing." Daniel accepted it gratefully, made a mental note to return the container with something more than just thanks. Mrs. Chen was always doing things like this, bringing them food, watching Emma for free when Daniel had interviews, slipping $20 bills into his hand when she thought he wasn't paying attention. The kindness of neighbors who had almost nothing themselves. Their apartment was exactly as they'd left it, cluttered and cramped and home. Daniel settled Emma on the couch with a blanket and her favorite stuffed bear, then went to the kitchen to call the pizza place. While he waited for the food to arrive, he opened his laptop, ancient, held together with electrical tape and prayers, and composed an email to Victoria Hale, formally accepting the position and thanking her for the opportunity. His fingers hovered over the keys for a long time before he could figure out how to express what he was feeling. The job offer wasn't just employment, it was dignity. It was the first time in 3 years that someone had looked at him and seen capability instead of liability. It was permission to hope again. In the end, he kept it simple and professional because anything more would have dissolved into emotions he couldn't afford to show to his new boss. But he meant every word. The pizza arrived. Daniel and Emma ate it straight from the box, grease dripping onto paper plates, breadsticks piled high between them. Emma managed 2 slices before the pain medication started making her drowsy. "Daddy?" she said, her eyelids drooping. Today was a really weird day. It really was. But it turned out okay, even though it was scary at first. Even though it was scary, Daniel agreed. Things can do that, right? Be scary and then turn out okay? Daniel thought about the past 3 years. The hospital room where his wife had died, leaving him alone with a 5-year-old and grief so heavy he could barely breathe. The job he'd had to quit because childcare cost more than he made. The interviews where he'd been told his resume gap was concerning. The nights when dinner was crackers and peanut butter because it was all they had. The eviction notice on the fridge. The bills he couldn't pay. The desperate grinding fear that he was failing the one person who mattered most. And then Emma tying his tie yesterday morning, telling him he looked like the best dad in the world. Victoria Hale standing barefoot in a corporate hallway letting him run. The job offer that changed everything. His daughter, alive and healing and eating pizza on their worn-out couch. "Yeah, baby," he said softly. "Sometimes things are scary, and then they turn out okay." Emma smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Daniel carried her to her bedroom, barely big enough for the twin bed and small dresser they'd bought at Goodwill, and tucked her in carefully, mindful of the cast. He stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, making sure she was really okay. His phone buzzed. Email notification. He pulled it out, expecting spam or another bill collector. It was from Victoria Hale. Mr. Carter, I'm pleased to receive your acceptance. Before you start Monday, there's one more matter to discuss. I've authorized a signing bonus of $10,000, payable immediately. HR will process it tomorrow. Consider it an advance on your future with the company and a recognition that emergencies don't wait for first paychecks. See you Monday at 9 a.m. VH. Daniel read it 3 times, then 4, then 5. $10,000. He could pay the hospital, catch up on rent, fix the eviction, buy Emma new clothes that actually fit, get their car out of storage. No, better yet, buy a reliable used car that wouldn't break down. Get his phone fixed, replace the broken iron, the dying laptop, the shoes with holes. He could breathe. For the first time in 3 years, he could actually breathe. Daniel sank down on the floor outside Emma's room, his back against the wall, and let himself cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears he'd learned to cry in the shower where Emma couldn't hear him. Real sobs that shook his whole body, 3 years of fear and exhaustion and barely held together hope, finally breaking free. He cried for his wife, who should have been here to see their daughter grow up. He cried for the man he'd been before, who'd thought life followed plans and hard work guaranteed success. He cried for every interview rejection, every overdue notice, every night he'd gone to bed hungry so Emma could have enough. And then, finally, he cried with relief. Because someone had seen him running, and instead of judging him, they'd chosen to run after him. Because his daughter was safe. Because tomorrow he could go to the bank and deposit a check that would solve problems that had seemed unsolvable 12 hours ago. Because he'd made it through the worst day of his life and found, on the other side, something that looked remarkably like a second chance. Daniel wiped his eyes and pulled himself together. There was still work to do. He needed to call the landlord, set up a payment plan for the back rent, contact the power company, email Emma's school about the field trip money, start planning for Monday, for his first day at a job that felt like salvation. But first, he just sat there on the floor outside his daughter's room, listening to her breathe and letting himself believe that maybe, finally, things were going to be okay. The eviction notice was still taped to the fridge. The bills were still stacked on the counter. The apartment was still too small and the neighborhood was still rough and life was still hard. But Daniel Carter had a job. He had insurance. He had a daughter who was alive and healing. And he had a boss who understood that when it mattered most, family came first. It wasn't everything. But right now, in this moment, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was a future. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork that felt surreal in their ordinariness. Daniel called the landlord Friday morning, his voice steady in a way it hadn't been in months, and negotiated a payment plan for the back rent. Mrs. Patterson had sounded shocked when he'd told her he could pay everything he owed plus next month's rent by Wednesday. "You won the lottery or something, Mr. Carter?" she'd asked, her usual harshness softened by surprise. "Something like that," Daniel had replied, and it wasn't entirely a lie. What else could you call it when your life transformed in the space of 24 hours? The power company was easier. They agreed to remove the disconnection order once he paid half the outstanding balance, which Daniel promised to do the moment the signing bonus cleared. Emma's school was delighted to receive the field trip payment, along with extra for the class fund. The billing department at St. Catherine's confirmed they'd received his payment plan agreement and would hold off on collections. With each call, each problem crossed off the list that had been crushing him for months, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not quite belief, that would take longer, but the tentative beginning of it. The sense that maybe he wasn't just treading water anymore. Maybe he was actually swimming toward shore. Saturday morning, he took Emma to the bank to deposit the signing bonus check. She'd insisted on coming, wanted to see the number on the paper that had made her father cry the night before. The teller had congratulated them, and Emma had stood a little straighter, proud in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. "Can we really get a car?" she'd asked on the bus ride home, her casted arm resting carefully in her lap. "Not yet. We need to save some of this money for emergencies. But soon, baby, soon." "What kind of car?" "Something reliable, maybe a Honda or a Toyota. Something that won't break down every other week like our old one did. Emma had nodded seriously, already planning. Can it be blue? Blue is my favorite color. We'll see what we can find. Saturday afternoon, they'd gone shopping. Actually shopping, not the careful calculation of every dollar that usually accompanied trips to the store. Daniel bought Emma new shoes, proper ones that fit and didn't have any holes. He bought groceries without checking prices, filling the cart with fresh fruit and vegetables they usually couldn't afford. He even splurged on the name brand cereal Emma loved but never asked for. At the checkout, when the total came to $217, Daniel handed over his debit card without the usual spike of anxiety. He had money in his account, real money, enough to cover this and more. The cashier had smiled at Emma. Someone's got a cool cast. What happened? I fell off the monkey bars, Emma had explained proudly, like it was an achievement. But I'm okay now. My daddy saved me. I didn't save you, Daniel had corrected gently, but Emma had just shaken her head. You did, Daddy. You always do. Sunday had been quiet, restful in a way their lives rarely were. They'd watched movies on the couch, Emma curled against his side with her bear tucked under her good arm. Daniel had made spaghetti for dinner, real spaghetti with meat sauce, not just butter and Parmesan, and they'd eaten it while Emma told him elaborate stories about the adventures her stuffed animals had while she was at school. It was normal. Beautifully, perfectly normal. The kind of Sunday afternoon that other families probably took for granted but felt like luxury to Daniel and Emma. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel had laid out his interview suit and realized it was truly beyond saving. The pants were worn thin at the knees, the jacket had a stain on the sleeve that wouldn't come out, and the whole thing smelled like the hospital in sweat and desperation. He'd worn it to 18 interviews, and it had witnessed every rejection, every closed door, every sympathetic smile that really meant we're going with someone else. It had also been what he was wearing when Victoria Hale had offered him a job, when his life had changed, when hope had come back. Daniel folded it carefully and set it aside. Tomorrow he'd drop it at the donation center. Someone else could use it, someone else starting their own journey through the wilderness of unemployment. For him, it was time for something new. Monday morning arrived with the kind of sharp clarity that made everything feel significant. Daniel woke at 5:30, showered, and stood in front of his closet staring at clothes that suddenly seemed inadequate. He settled on his best pair of khakis, only slightly worn, and a button-down shirt that Emma had helped him pick out at Goodwill 3 months ago. You look nice, Daddy, Emma said from her doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Thanks, baby. What are you doing up so early? I wanted to see you before your first day. She patted across the floor and hugged him carefully, her casted arm between them. Are you nervous? A little, Daniel admitted. It's been a long time since I had a real job. You'll be great. Ms. Hale already knows you're the best because you came to save me instead of staying at the interview. That means she's smart. Daniel kissed the top of her head. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just finally noticed. Emma grinned up at him. Can I help you pick a tie? They went through his limited selection, 3 ties, all of them showing their age, and Emma chose the blue one with thin silver stripes. She stood on a kitchen chair, just like she had before the interview that changed everything, and helped him tie it with her good hand. Perfect, she declared, stepping back to admire her work. Now, you really look like a boss. Senior operations manager, Daniel corrected, but he was smiling. That's practically a boss. Mrs. Chen had agreed to watch Emma after school until Daniel could adjust his schedule or find proper childcare, another act of kindness from a neighbor who barely had anything herself. Daniel dropped Emma at school early, walking her to the classroom instead of the usual bus stop routine. Have a good day, baby. Mrs. Chen will pick you up at 3. I know, you told me like 5 times. Emma rolled her eyes but squeezed his hand. You have a good day too. Don't be nervous. You're going to be amazing. Daniel watched her disappear into the classroom, her purple backpack bouncing against her shoulders, and felt the familiar tug of separation. 3 years of being her only parent, her only constant, and it was still hard to let her go, even for a few hours, even to something as normal as school. The bus ride to Hale Industries took 40 minutes. Daniel spent them reviewing the employee handbook Victoria's assistant had emailed him, trying to memorize reporting structures and department names and policies about everything from sick leave to expense reports. His hands were sweating by the time he reached his stop. The building looked different in the morning light, less intimidating somehow now that he was walking through the doors as an employee instead of a desperate candidate. Security recognized him from Friday and waved him through with a friendly nod. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt surreal. 4 days ago, he'd run out of this building thinking his life was over. Now he was riding back up to start it over. Victoria's assistant met him in the lobby, an efficient-looking woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "Mr. Carter, I'm Patricia. Welcome to Hale Industries. Let me show you to your office." Office. Not cubicle, not desk, but office. Daniel followed Patricia through hallways that were already bustling with early arrivers, past conference rooms and break areas and walls covered with mission statements about integrity and innovation and putting people first. His office was small but real. A desk, a chair, a window that looked out over the city, a nameplate that read Daniel Carter, Senior Operations Manager. Daniel stood in the doorway staring at it, trying to make it feel real. "Ms. Hale would like to see you at 9 for a brief orientation meeting," Patricia said. "In the meantime, I'll get you set up with your computer and access badges. HR will be by at 10:30 to handle your paperwork. Is there anything you need right away?" "I don't think so. Thank you, Patricia." She smiled. "We're glad to have you, Mr. Carter. I've worked with Ms. Hale for 8 years, and I've never seen her move so fast to hire someone. You must have made quite an impression." After she left, Daniel sat down at his desk and tried to process the fact that this was his now, his office, his job, his second chance. He opened his email and found 17 messages already waiting, welcome notes from colleagues, meeting invitations, system access confirmations. He was reading through them when someone knocked on his doorframe. "Daniel Carter?" A man about Daniel's age stood there, hand extended. "James Rodriguez, Operations Director. You'll be reporting to me. Welcome aboard." Daniel stood quickly, shaking the offered hand. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to getting started. Victoria speaks very highly of you, says you've got the kind of character this company needs." James leaned against the doorframe. "I'll be honest. When she told me she was hiring someone who walked out of an interview, I thought she'd lost her mind. But then she told me why you walked out, and I got it. You made the right call." "I appreciate that. We've got a department meeting Wednesday morning. I'll introduce you to the team, get you up to speed on current projects. For today, just focus on getting settled, meeting people, learning the systems. Don't try to save the world on day 1. James grinned. Save that for week 2. The morning passed in a whirlwind of introductions and information. Daniel met his team, 6 people who would report to him, their faces friendly and curious. He filled out paperwork with HR, got his ID badge and parking pass, even though he didn't have a car yet, but he would soon. He attended a brief orientation where Victoria herself welcomed the new hires, her eyes finding Daniel's across the room with a small, knowing smile. At lunch, Daniel sat in the company cafeteria. Free lunch, another benefit he couldn't quite believe, and texted Emma a picture of his office. Her response came immediately. "So cool. Is that really yours?" "Really mine," he typed back. "I'm proud of you, Daddy." Daniel stared at those words for a long time, his throat tight. 8 years old, and she'd been carrying worry for him, anxiety about money and security that no child should have to bear. Now maybe she could stop. Maybe they both could. The afternoon brought meetings, so many meetings, where Daniel was briefed on projects and processes and priorities. His head was spinning with information by the time 4:30 rolled around. He was gathering his things, planning to catch the bus to pick up Emma from Mrs. Chen's, when Patricia appeared in his doorway again. "Ms. Hale would like to see you before you leave, if you have a moment." Daniel's stomach dropped. Had he done something wrong already? Missed some crucial detail? Of course. Victoria's office was on the 45th floor, a corner space with windows that overlooked the entire city. She was on the phone when Patricia showed him in, but she gestured for him to sit. Daniel perched on the edge of the chair, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. "I understand, but the timeline isn't negotiable," Victoria was saying into the phone. "We either deliver by the deadline or we don't take the contract. It's that simple." A pause. Good. I'll expect your revised proposal by Wednesday. She hung up and turned her full attention to Daniel. How was your first day? Overwhelming, Daniel admitted. In a good way. There's a lot to learn. There always is. You'll get there. Victoria pulled a folder from her desk drawer. I wanted to check in, make sure you have everything you need. Patricia mentioned you don't have a car yet? Not yet. I'm working on it. The company has a partnership with a local dealership. If you're interested, I can have HR set up an employee vehicle program. Low-interest loan, payments through payroll deduction, takes some of the stress out of car shopping. Daniel felt his eyes prickling. Every time he thought he'd absorbed all the ways this job was changing his life, something new appeared. That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you. Consider it done. I'll have Patricia send you the details. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him. Daniel, I want to be clear about something. I didn't hire you as a charity case. I hired you because I believe you're going to be an asset to this company. You have skills, experience, and, most importantly, judgment. But I also know you're coming into this with challenges that most new hires don't have. Single parent, financial stress, years away from the corporate world. If you need support, if you need flexibility, if you need help, ask. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to me if you're struggling instead of trying to white-knuckle through it alone. Deal? Deal, Victoria smiled. Good. Now go home to your daughter. Tell her I said she's welcome to visit the office sometime if she'd like to see where her dad works. Daniel left the building in a daze, riding the elevator down with people who were complaining about deadlines and difficult clients and office politics. Normal problems, the kind that didn't involve choosing between food and electricity. He wanted to tell them how lucky they were, but he just smiled and nodded and stepped out into the evening air. The bus was crowded. Daniel stood holding the rail, watching the city pass by and thinking about how different the same route felt when you were riding it towards something instead of away from it. Mrs. Chen's apartment smelled like ginger and garlic, and Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework when Daniel knocked. She looked up, her face splitting into a grin. Daddy, how was work? It was good, baby. Really good. How was school? Boring. We learned about fractions. I already know fractions. Emma gathered her things, thanking Mrs. Chen profusely for the after-school snack. Can I see your office tomorrow? Maybe on the weekend. Ms. Hale said you're welcome to visit. Emma's eyes went wide. She did? She wants to meet me? She wants to meet the girl who's important enough that I ran out of an interview for her. They walked home hand in hand, Emma chattering about her day while Daniel listened and tried to memorize every detail. This was what he'd been fighting for all along, these ordinary moments, the routine of school and homework and dinner. The simple, beautiful normalness of being a parent without the constant undercurrent of terror. That night, after dinner, chicken and vegetables, a real meal cooked in their kitchen, Emma presented Daniel with a drawing she'd made at school. It showed two stick figures, one tall and one small, standing in front of a building labeled Daddy's Work. Above them, she'd drawn a sun with a smile and written, "We did it," in careful letters. For your office, she explained, so you remember. Remember what, baby? That we're a team, that we did this together. Emma's expression was serious, older than her 8 years. You didn't save me, Daddy. We saved each other. Daniel hung the drawing on his refrigerator, right over the eviction notice he still hadn't taken down, a reminder of where they'd been, where they were going, what they'd survived. The rest of the week unfolded in a rhythm that felt almost foreign in its stability. Daniel woke early, got Emma ready for school, caught the bus to work. He learned his job, met with his team, started contributing to projects. He made mistakes, forgot to copy someone on an email, showed up to a meeting in the wrong conference room, but they were normal mistakes, the kind that came with being new, not the kind that cost you everything. His first paycheck came Friday, direct deposited at midnight. Daniel checked his bank account at 6 a.m. and stared at the number there. After taxes and the payment plan deductions he'd authorized for the hospital and back rent, he still had more money than he'd seen in one place in 3 years. He paid bills, caught up on everything they owed, set up automatic payments so nothing would slip through the cracks again, transferred money to a savings account, something he hadn't had since before his wife got sick. Put aside money for Emma's orthopedic appointment next week. And then, because he could, because for the first time in forever he actually could, he took Emma shopping. Not for necessities this time. For things she wanted. A new backpack to replace the one with the broken zipper. Books from the list the school librarian had recommended. A winter coat that fit properly instead of the too small one she'd been squeezing into. Art supplies for the projects she loved. A stuffed penguin she'd been eyeing at the store for months, the one she'd never asked for because she knew they couldn't afford it. At the toy store, Emma had stood in front of the penguin display with tears in her eyes. "We can really get it? We can really get it." She'd hugged the penguin so tight Daniel thought she might never let go. "I'm going to name him Mr. Waddles, and he's going to sleep on my bed every night, and I'm going to tell him about how we used to not have money, but now we do because you got the best job in the world." That night, Daniel tucked Emma into bed with Mr. Waddles tucked under her good arm and her new books stacked on the nightstand. "Daddy?" she said as he was turning off the light. "Are we going to be okay now? Like, really okay?" Daniel sat back down on the edge of her bed. "Yeah, baby. I think we really are." "Promise?" He thought about all the promises he'd made over the past 3 years, the ones he'd kept and the ones he'd broken despite his best efforts. He thought about Victoria Hale standing in that hallway, choosing to see character instead of liability. He thought about the signing bonus that had solved problems that seemed unsolvable. He thought about his office with his name on it, his team who respected him, his paycheck that meant security instead of scrambling. "I promise," Daniel said, and this time, it wasn't a lie he told to make her feel better. This time, it was the truth. 3 months passed with the kind of quiet transformation that only becomes visible when you stop to look back at where you started. Daniel marked the time not in days or weeks, but in small victories that accumulated like interest. Emma's cast coming off to reveal an arm that had healed straight and strong. The approval letter for a car loan at a rate he could actually afford. The first full night's sleep he'd had in years because there was money in the bank and food in the fridge and no red-stamped envelopes in the mail. The car had been Emma's choice in the end. They'd gone to the dealership on a Saturday morning, Daniel armed with pre-approval from Hale Industries' employee program, and Emma armed with a notebook where she'd written down all the requirements for their perfect car. Reliable, she'd written in careful third-grade cursive. Blue, if possible. Cup holders for both of us. Safe. The salesman had taken one look at Daniel's worn jacket and Emma's serious expression and probably assumed they were wasting his time. But when Daniel had presented the pre-approval letter, the man's attitude had shifted so fast it would have been funny if it weren't so familiar. Suddenly they were valued customers. Suddenly every attention was paid to their needs. They'd found it in the back lot, a 3-year-old Honda Civic in a deep blue that made Emma gasp. Not perfect, the salesman had admitted. It had some minor cosmetic issues, a small dent in the rear bumper, which was why it was priced below market. Daniel had looked at Emma's shining eyes and hadn't cared about the dent at all. "Can we test drive it?" Emma had insisted on coming along, buckled into the back seat with Mr. Waddles while Daniel navigated the car around the lot. It handled smoothly, the engine was quiet, and when Emma had leaned forward and whispered, "This is the one, Daddy," "I can feel it." Daniel had known his decision was made. He'd signed the papers that afternoon, driven off the lot with Emma bouncing in the passenger seat, properly positioned now that they had their own car and could adjust things correctly, singing along to the radio at the top of her lungs. They'd stopped for ice cream to celebrate, real ice cream from the good place instead of the cheapest option at the grocery store, and Emma had gotten chocolate chip cookie dough with sprinkles and hadn't worried once about the cost. "This is the best day ever," she'd declared, chocolate smeared across her chin. Better than Christmas? Better than every Christmas combined. The car had changed everything in ways Daniel hadn't fully anticipated. No more 2-hour bus commutes, no more rushing to catch connections or missing them and having to wait in the cold, no more arriving to work already exhausted from the journey. He could drop Emma at school and make it to the office by 8:30. He could pick her up himself instead of imposing on Mrs. Chen's generosity. He could stop at the grocery store on the way home without having to calculate what he could carry on the bus. It was freedom. Small, practical freedom that most people never thought twice about, but that felt like a miracle to Daniel. Work had brought its own transformations. The first project Daniel had led, streamlining the supply chain for one of Hale Industries' manufacturing clients, had come in under budget and ahead of schedule. James Rodriguez had praised his attention to detail at the department meeting, and Daniel had felt something he hadn't experienced in years: pride in work well done. His team had warmed to him quickly once they realized he actually listened to their ideas instead of just dictating orders. Maria, his logistics coordinator, had pulled him aside after a particularly difficult meeting with a vendor to tell him he was the best manager she'd worked for in 15 years. Daniel had gone home that night and told Emma about it, still slightly stunned. "I told you that you'd be amazing," Emma had said matter-of-factly. "When do I get to see your office? You keep promising." Daniel had laughed. "This weekend, I promise. For real this time." He'd brought her in on Saturday when the building was mostly empty. Emma had walked through the halls like she was touring a palace, her eyes wide as she took in the marble floors and glass walls and the city view from the 42nd floor. She'd sat in Daniel's chair, spinning in slow circles, and declared it very professional. They'd been examining the employee recognition wall, photos of team members who'd gone above and beyond, when Victoria Hale had emerged from her office. Daniel had been surprised to see her there on a weekend, though perhaps he shouldn't have been. He was learning that Victoria approached leadership the same way he approached parenting. You showed up, especially when it mattered. "Ms. Hale," Daniel had said, standing up straighter automatically. "I didn't realize anyone else was here. I hope it's okay that I brought Emma in to see the office." "Of course it's okay. You must be Emma." Victoria had crouched down to Emma's level, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria. I've heard wonderful things about you." Emma had shaken her hand solemnly. "My daddy says you gave him a job when nobody else would. Thank you for that." Something had flickered across Victoria's face. Surprise, maybe, or emotion she was used to keeping contained. "Your father earned that job. I just recognized what he had to offer." She'd straightened, her eyes meeting Daniel's. "I actually wanted to talk to you about something. Do you have a few minutes?" Daniel had nodded, and Victoria had led them to a conference room while Emma had explored the supply closet across the hall, fascinated by the industrial staplers and the label maker. Once they were alone, Victoria's professional mask had softened slightly. "I've been impressed with your work these past 3 months, Daniel. Very impressed. You have a talent for seeing solutions that others miss, and your team respects you. That's rare." "Thank you. I'm just trying to do the job well." "You're doing more than that, which is why I'd like to talk to you about expansion." Victoria had pulled out a tablet, showing him organizational charts and growth projections. "We're opening a new division focused on operational consulting. I want you to help lead it." Daniel had stared at the numbers, his mind racing. "Lead it? Ms. Hale, I've only been here 3 months. And in those 3 months, you've proven you can manage complex projects, lead teams, and deliver results. More importantly, you understand something that many people in this industry don't, that business is fundamentally about people. How we treat employees, how we serve clients, how we make decisions when the stakes are high." She'd paused. "You made the right call when your daughter needed you. That told me everything I needed to know about your judgment." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. It would mean more responsibility, a significant raise, and probably longer hours sometimes. But it would also mean more flexibility in how you structure your time. You could build the kind of culture you want to work in." Victoria had smiled. "I'm building a company based on the principle that we can be successful without sacrificing our humanity. I need people who believe that too." Daniel had thought about the past 3 years, the grinding poverty, the desperation, the constant fear. He'd thought about running through the city to reach Emma, about sitting in that hospital room with no idea how he'd pay for her care. He'd thought about the job offer that had saved them, about the signing bonus that had solved impossible problems, about every small kindness Victoria had shown without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. "I believe it," he'd said quietly. "I'll think about it. Seriously consider it. That's all I ask." Emma had reappeared then, carrying a label maker and a roll of labels she'd created. "Look, Daddy, I made one that says, 'Best dad in the world for your desk.'" Victoria had watched them with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. "She's a special kid. She's everything." I know the feeling. Victoria had glanced at her watch. I should let you two enjoy your Saturday. Think about the offer, Daniel. Talk it over with Emma if you'd like. Sometimes kids see things more clearly than we do. They'd left the building with Emma still chattering about the office, about meeting Ms. Hale, about how her daddy was going to be super important in a new division. Daniel had listened and tried to process what had just happened. 3 months ago, he couldn't get an interview. Now he was being offered a leadership position in an expanding company. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel had pulled out the notebook where he tracked their finances. The numbers still amazed him every time he looked at them. Hospital bill, paid in full ahead of schedule. Rent, current, with 3 months saved in advance. Credit card, paid down to a manageable balance he was chipping away at monthly. Savings, actually growing instead of being constantly drained. And if he took Victoria's offer, the salary increase would mean they could move. Find a bigger apartment in a better neighborhood. Somewhere Emma could have her own room that fit more than just a bed. Somewhere with a playground that wasn't broken, and schools that had art programs and field trips. The thought was intoxicating. It was also terrifying. What if he failed? What if he took on too much and couldn't deliver? What if he let Victoria down after everything she'd done for them? But then Daniel thought about Emma saying, "We saved each other," and realized that maybe that was the point. You took chances on people not because you knew they'd succeed, but because you believed they deserved the opportunity to try. Victoria had taken that chance on him. Maybe it was time for him to take it on himself. The next Monday, Daniel had knocked on Victoria's door during lunch. "I've thought about your offer," he'd said. "I'm in. If you still want me." Victoria's smile had been genuine, warm. "I still want you. Welcome to the executive team, Daniel. We'll make the announcement Friday at the company meeting." The days leading up to the announcement had been a blur of meetings and planning sessions. Daniel had met with the other division heads, started outlining his vision for the consulting group, interviewed potential team members. It was exhilarating and exhausting, and everything he'd forgotten work could be when you actually cared about what you were building. Friday arrived with the first real cold snap of autumn. Daniel had dressed carefully that morning in the new suit he'd bought with his second paycheck. Nothing extravagant, but professional, well-fitted, the kind of suit that made you feel capable when you wore it. Emma had helped him with his tie again, a ritual they'd maintained. "You look like a real boss now," she'd said, and there was no question mark in her voice this time. The company meeting was held in the main auditorium, all 200 employees gathered for the quarterly update. Daniel sat in the front row with the other executives, his heart pounding as Victoria took the stage. She'd run through the usual updates, financial performance, new contracts, employee recognitions, before reaching the announcement Daniel was waiting for. As many of you know, Hale Industries has been exploring expansion into operational consulting, Victoria had said, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium. "Today, I'm pleased to announce that we're moving forward with this initiative, and that Daniel Carter will be leading the new division as Director of Consulting Operations." The applause had been genuine, enthusiastic. Daniel had stood when Victoria gestured to him, making his way to the stage on legs that felt unsteady. The faces looking back at him were friendly, encouraging. These were his colleagues now, his peers. "Thank you," Daniel had said, taking the microphone Victoria handed him. "I know some of you are wondering who I am and why Ms. Hale chose me for this role. The truth is, 3 months ago, I was a single father who couldn't get an interview to save his life. I'd been out of work for 3 years, raising my daughter alone, and every door I knocked on closed in my face." He could see people leaning forward, listening. In the back row, he spotted Maria, his logistics coordinator, nodding. "The day I interviewed here, my daughter was in an accident. She was rushed to the hospital, and I left that interview in the middle of it to get to her, because that's what parents do. We show up for our kids, even when it costs us everything." Daniel's voice was steady now, sure. "I thought I'd destroyed my last chance. Instead, Ms. Hale taught me something important. That a company's values aren't just words on a wall. They're the choices we make when it matters most." Daniel had looked at Victoria then, seeing the emotion she was trying to keep professional. She chose to see my decision to run to my daughter not as a weakness, but as exactly the kind of character this company needs. And that changed my life. It saved my life, honestly. So as I build this new division, I'm going to remember that lesson. Business is about people, our employees, our clients, the communities we serve. If we remember that, everything else follows. The applause when he finished was louder this time, sustained. People stood. Daniel had seen James Rodriguez wiping his eyes, Maria openly crying. Victoria had shaken his hand, her grip firm and proud. That was perfect, she'd whispered. Exactly what they needed to hear. The rest of the day had been a whirlwind of congratulations and handshakes. Daniel had received dozens of emails from colleagues, including several from people who shared their own stories of struggling to balance work and family, of being judged for gaps in their resume, of feeling like they had to hide their personal lives to be taken seriously professionally. He'd answered every single one, sharing what he'd learned, that the right job wasn't the one that demanded you sacrifice everything else, but the one that understood you were a whole person with responsibilities and relationships that mattered. That evening, Daniel had picked Emma up from her after-school program in their blue Honda, and she'd immediately noticed something different in his face. Something good happened, she'd declared from the back seat. Something very good. How do you feel about getting a new apartment? Emma's shriek of joy had nearly deafened him. Really? With my own room? That I can paint purple if I want? Purple walls, purple ceiling if you want it. When can we start looking? This weekend. They'd found it 3 weeks later, a 3-bedroom apartment in a complex with a pool and a playground that actually worked. The neighborhood had good schools, safe streets, and families who waved hello instead of keeping their heads down. Emma's room was twice the size of her old one, with windows that let in actual sunlight and enough space for a real desk where she could do homework. The moving process had been chaotic and wonderful. Mrs. Chen had cried when they'd told her they were leaving, but she'd also been happy for them. Daniel had slipped her $500 in an envelope as thanks for all the time she'd helped them, and though she'd protested, he could see the relief in her eyes. Their new neighbors had helped carry boxes up the stairs. The family next door had kids Emma's age, and within an hour of arriving, she'd been playing in the courtyard like she'd lived there her whole life. Daniel had stood on their new balcony, watching her laugh with other children, and felt something in his chest finally fully relax. They'd painted Emma's room together on a Saturday, covering the walls in the exact shade of purple she'd been dreaming about. She'd insisted on adding glow-in-the-dark stars to the ceiling, and they'd spent an evening carefully placing them in constellations Emma had learned about in school. It's perfect, she'd declared, standing in the middle of her purple sanctuary with Mr. Waddles under one arm. This is the best room in the whole world. You've earned it, baby. We've earned it, Emma had corrected. Remember? We're a team. November had brought Emma's 9th birthday, and for the first time in 3 years, Daniel had been able to give her the kind of party she deserved. They'd rented space at a roller skating rink, the same one they'd had to skip last year because they couldn't afford it. Emma had invited 12 friends from school, and Daniel had watched his daughter skate in circles, her purple party dress flowing around her, her laughter echoing through the rink. Victoria had sent a gift, a beautiful set of art supplies with a note that said, "For Emma, who reminds us what matters most." Emma had read it 3 times, then carefully tucked it into the memory box where she kept special things. "Miss Hale is nice," Emma had said that night as Daniel tucked her in, surrounded by new stuffed animals and books and all the birthday gifts she'd received. "She is. She changed our lives." "You changed our lives," Emma had countered. "You're the one who went to that interview. You're the one who worked really hard. You're the one who takes care of me every single day." "I just did what any parent would do." "No, Daddy. You did what the best parent would do. There's a difference." December arrived with the first snow of the season, fat flakes that turned the city into something magical. The company holiday party was held at an upscale hotel downtown, employees encouraged to bring their families. Daniel had hesitated about taking Emma, worried she might be bored or out of place, but she'd begged to go. "Please, Daddy? I want to see all the people you work with. And you said there would be fancy food." She'd worn her favorite dress, the purple one from her birthday party, and Daniel had put on his good suit. They'd arrived to find the ballroom decorated with lights and garlands, tables laden with food that made Emma's eyes go wide. His team had surrounded them immediately, everyone eager to meet the famous Emma they'd heard so much about. She'd charmed them all, asking serious questions about their work, and telling them stories about her father that made Daniel's ears turn red. He practices his presentations in the car, Emma had confided to Maria, and sometimes he talks to himself about profit margins when he's making breakfast. That's because your dad really cares about doing good work, Maria had said, winking at Daniel. Victoria had found them by the dessert table, where Emma was carefully selecting one of each type of cookie available. Emma? Victoria had said warmly, I'm so glad you came. Are you enjoying yourself? It's amazing. Everyone here really likes my dad. We do. He's one of our best. Victoria had glanced at Daniel. Could I borrow you both for a moment? She'd led them to a quieter corner of the ballroom, where a photographer was set up taking professional photos of employees and their families. I'm putting together a display for the main lobby, Victoria had explained. Photos that show who we really are, not just professionals, but people with families and lives outside these walls. Would you be willing to be part of that? Daniel had looked at Emma, who'd nodded enthusiastically. They'd posed together, Daniel's hand on Emma's shoulder, both of them smiling genuinely at the camera. When they'd finished, Victoria had thanked them and then added quietly, just to Daniel, I want people to see that this is what success looks like. A parent who shows up for their child, a child who's loved and secure. That's what we're building here. The photo had gone up in the lobby 2 weeks later, part of a larger display that showed Hale Industries employees in their real lives, coaching Little League, volunteering at food banks, spending time with aging parents, pursuing hobbies and passions outside of work. Daniel's photo with Emma had been given a place of prominence, with a caption that read, Daniel Carter, Director of Consulting Operations with his daughter Emma. She's my why, says Daniel. Everything I do for her. Employees had stopped Daniel in the hallways to tell him how much they appreciated seeing leadership that looked like their own lives. Messy, complicated, full of competing priorities that somehow had to balance. Several had opened up about their own struggles, their own moments of choosing family over career and fearing the consequences. Daniel had listened to each story, recognized himself in every one of them, and realized what Victoria had known from the beginning, that by being honest about his journey, by refusing to hide the parts of his life that the corporate world usually demanded you suppress, he was giving others permission to be whole people too. The consulting division had launched officially in January, a full year after that terrible, wonderful day when Daniel had run out of an interview and toured his daughter. The team he'd built was small but excellent, people who'd been overlooked by other companies for reasons that had nothing to do with their abilities. A brilliant analyst who'd taken 5 years off to care for a sick parent. A project manager who'd been deemed not ambitious enough because he refused to work 80-hour weeks. A strategist who'd been fired from her last job for requesting maternity leave. Together, they'd created something special. A division that delivered exceptional results while respecting that their employees had lives and responsibilities outside the office. A place where I need to leave early for my kid's recital wasn't a career-limiting admission, but a normal part of being human. Their first major client presentation had been in February. Daniel had led it, his team backing him up with data and analysis that was both thorough and creative. They'd won the contract, a manufacturing company that needed help streamlining their operations, and Daniel had celebrated by taking Emma out for pizza. We did it again, he'd told her over pepperoni and breadsticks. You always do it, Emma had replied with the confidence of a 9-year-old who'd never doubted her father. That's just what you do. Now in late March, Daniel stood in Victoria's office for their quarterly review. The numbers were good. Excellent, actually. The consulting division had exceeded every projection, client satisfaction scores were through the roof, and employee retention in his department was the highest in the company. I'm promoting you, Victoria said without preamble. Vice President of Operations. You'll oversee not just consulting, but also our internal operations management. It's a big job, Daniel. Are you ready for it? Daniel thought about the journey that had brought him here. The man who'd run through the city in ruined shoes, terrified and desperate. The father who'd held his daughter in a hospital bed and wondered how he'd ever pay for her care. The candidate who'd walked out of an interview thinking he'd destroyed his last chance. That man wouldn't have been ready. That man had been surviving, not leading. But he wasn't that man anymore. He'd been rebuilt, piece by piece, through the experience of being seen and valued and trusted. through the simple, radical act of someone betting on his character instead of his resume. "I'm ready," Daniel said. Victoria smiled. "I know you are. I knew it a year ago, when you chose your daughter over a job. Everything since then has just been you realizing what I already saw." That evening, Daniel picked Emma up from school and drove to the park near their apartment. They sat on the swings, not swinging, just sitting side by side in the late afternoon sun. "I got promoted again," Daniel said. Emma turned to look at him. "That's really good, right?" "It's really good." "Are you happy, Daddy?" Daniel looked at his daughter, healthy, thriving, secure in ways she hadn't been a year ago. He thought about their apartment with the purple bedroom and the glow-in-the-dark stars. He thought about the car that started every morning, the bank account that had money in it, the future that felt possible instead of impossible. But more than any of that, he thought about the fact that Emma asked if he was happy, not if they were safe or if they had enough money. She was finally able to be a kid again, to think about happiness instead of survival. "Yeah, baby," Daniel said, his throat tight. "I'm happy. Are you?" "I'm really happy. I have my own room and friends at school, and you're not worried all the time anymore. You smile more now." "Do I?" "You do. You smile when you think I'm not looking. Sometimes I catch you just standing there, smiling at nothing." Daniel pulled her into a hug, this daughter who'd survived so much with such grace, who'd worried about him when she should have been worrying about homework and playground politics, who'd never once made him feel like his struggles were a burden. "I love you, Emma Carter. You know that?" "I know. I love you too." She pulled back, grinning. "Can we celebrate your promotion with ice cream?" "We can celebrate with whatever you want." "Ice cream is good, with sprinkles." They walked to the ice cream shop hand in hand, and Daniel noticed he was doing it, that thing Emma had mentioned, smiling at nothing. Or maybe not nothing. Maybe at everything. That night, after Emma was asleep in her purple room with Mr. Waddles and her new books and the constellation of glow-in-the-dark stars overhead, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open. He'd been thinking about something for weeks now, and tonight felt like the right time. He opened a blank document and began to write. To anyone reading this who's struggling, who feels like they're drowning, who thinks they'll never catch a break, I see you. I was you. A year ago, I was a single father with no job, no prospects, and no idea how I was going to keep a roof over my daughter's head. Then something happened. Not luck exactly, though there was some of that. But more importantly, someone saw me differently than I saw myself. Someone looked past the resume gap and the desperation and saw character worth investing in. This letter is my way of paying that forward. If you're in the position to hire someone, look beyond the polished resume. Look for the single parents, the caregivers, the people who've had to step away from their careers for reasons that speak to their humanity, not their inability. Those people aren't broken. They're often the strongest, most resilient, most valuable employees you'll ever find. And if you're the person struggling, keep going, keep showing up. Keep choosing your family, your values, your integrity, even when it seems like it's costing you everything, because somewhere, someone is watching. Someone who'll recognize that what looks like a liability to everyone else is actually your greatest strength. You're not failing, you're surviving, and survival is the first step to everything else. Now, Daniel saved the document and sent it to Victoria with a note. "Thought this might be useful for the company blog. If not, no worries." Her response came 30 minutes later. "It's perfect. Publishing it tomorrow. Thank you for this, Daniel, for everything you bring to this company." The blog post went live the next morning. By afternoon, it had been shared 200 times. By the end of the week, over 10,000. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories, thanking Daniel for putting words to experiences they'd thought only they had endured. Several hiring managers reached out to ask for guidance on changing their recruiting practices. 3 separate news outlets requested interviews. A nonprofit focused on helping underemployed parents asked if Daniel would speak at their annual conference. Standing in front of 300 people at that conference 2 months later, looking out at faces that reflected his own struggle back at him, Daniel told his story. The running through the city, the hospital room, the job offer that changed everything, and what he'd learned about worth and character and second chances. "The worst day of my life didn't end my story," he said. the words coming easier now, practiced but still genuine. It revealed who I truly was. And because someone chose to run after me instead of letting me walk away, my daughter and I didn't just survive. We rebuilt our entire future. But here's what I want you to understand. You don't need someone to save you. You're already doing the saving every day just by showing up for the people who depend on you. What you need is someone to open the door, someone to see your value, someone to take a chance. And if you're the person with the power to open doors, do it. Take chances on people whose resumes don't tell their whole story, because those people, they're going to change your company in ways you can't imagine. They changed mine. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of people approached Daniel with their stories, their tears, their thanks. A young mother who'd been out of work for 2 years after her twins were born. A man who'd quit his job to care for his dying father and couldn't get hired anywhere. A woman who'd disclosed her childcare challenges in an interview and never heard back. Daniel listened to every story, shook every hand, and gave them the only thing he had to give: hope. And the reminder that their worth wasn't determined by corporate gatekeepers who couldn't see past conventional metrics. That night, back in their apartment, Emma was waiting up for him despite it being past her bedtime. "How was your speech?" "It was good, baby. Really good." "Did you tell them about me?" "I told them about us, about how we're a team." Emma smiled and hugged him tight. "We are the best team. We really are." Daniel tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and stood in the doorway of her purple room, watching her fall asleep. The glow-in-the-dark stars were just beginning to show as the last light faded from the sky. A year and a half ago, he'd stood in a different doorway of a different room, watching his daughter sleep in a space barely big enough to hold her bed, and wondered if he was failing her, if he'd ever be enough. Now he knew the answer. He'd always been enough. He just needed someone to see it. And because Victoria Hale had chosen to run after him, instead of letting him disappear into unemployment statistics and corporate rejection letters, because she'd seen character where others saw only gaps, Daniel Carter hadn't just survived. He'd thrived. Emma had thrived. And together, they were building a future that honored both the struggles that had shaped them and the hope that had saved them. The worst day of Daniel's life had become the turning point. The moment when running toward his daughter, instead of away from his problems, had proven to be the rightest decision he'd ever made. And in the quiet of that purple room, with his daughter safe and happy and dreaming of whatever 9-year-olds dream about, Daniel understood fully what it meant to be home. Not the apartment, though that was nice. Not the job, though that had saved them. Home was wherever Emma was. And everything he'd built, everything he'd become, everything he'd learned about worth and dignity and second chances, it all came back to that simple, unchangeable truth. She was his why, his everything, his home, and they were going to be just fine.